VCU graduate stage walkout during Youngkin commencement speech. By Darius Spearman, African Elements. Richmond, Virginia. On Saturday, more than 100 Virginia Commonwealth University graduates walked out of their commencement ceremony. The walkout began as Governor Glenn Youngkin started delivering the keynote address. The students' demonstration protested Youngkin's controversial stances on racial equity and LGBTQ+ issues in education. Source: The Washington Post. In the days leading up to the ceremony at the Greater Richmond Convention Center, VCU's NAACP chapter had called on the university to revoke Youngkin's invitation to speak. Moreover, some students had announced plans to stage a walkout. Source: The Washington Post. As the students exited the ceremony to cheers and applause, they marched through Richmond. They chanted slogans like "We can't take this anymore" and "Human rights are not political." Notably, many of the protesting graduates were African American studies majors. Sources: The New York Times, The Washington Post. The students' protest reflected ongoing tensions over Youngkin's efforts to roll back diversity and inclusion initiatives in Virginia schools. Specifically, the governor has claimed such programs promote divisive concepts like critical race theory. Source: The Washington Post. As governor, I will stand for excellence in education, Youngkin said during his campaign. We will not teach critical race theory, and I will stand up for teachers and parents against these kinds of cancel culture initiatives. Source: The American Independent. In fact, Youngkin's first executive order banned the teaching of inherently divisive concepts, including critical race theory, in K-12 schools. Additionally, he established a tip line for parents to report such teaching. Sources: AP News, American Oversight. The VCU students who walked out of their graduation ceremony as Governor Glenn Youngkin began his commencement speech were protesting several specific issues related to race, gender, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Here are the key points. Opposition to Youngkin's efforts to restrict teaching on systemic racism. First and foremost, the students took issue with Youngkin's stance on how race is taught in schools. During his campaign, Youngkin used conservative rhetoric regarding how schools taught about race. Shortly after taking office, he issued executive orders aimed at banning critical race theory he alleged was being taught in Virginia's K-12 schools. His administration later faced backlash over inaccurate draft history standards. Sources: VPM News, Yahoo News. The students also protested Youngkin's intervention in VCU's racial literacy curriculum. In March 2024, at the Youngkin administration's request, VCU's provost sent draft racial literacy curriculum materials to the state's education secretary for review. The day before graduation, VCU's Board of Visitors voted not to mandate a racial literacy course requirement that students and faculty had advocated for. Sources: VPM News, Richmond Times-Dispatch, The Daily Progress. Some students who walked out cited the Youngkin administration's K-12 transgender policies as a reason for their protest. The policies aimed to require students to use school bathrooms matching their birth sex and would force school employees to refer to students by pronouns matching their official records. Source: Richmond Times-Dispatch. More broadly, the students criticized the Youngkin administration's overall stance on diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) programs in education. In April, students protested Youngkin's request to review VCU's racial literacy syllabi materials, seeing it as intervention in academic matters. Sources: The Daily Progress, Yahoo News, Richmond Times-Dispatch. Finally, the students protested Youngkin's support for universities that broke up pro-Palestine encampments on campuses. Some held signs and wore keffiyehs in solidarity with Palestinians during the walkout. Sources: Richmond Times-Dispatch, Yahoo News. Prior to the ceremony, some students had asked the VCU Board of Visitors to remove Youngkin as the commencement speaker. They cited his stances on diversity initiatives, pro-Palestine protests, and a potential racial literacy course requirement. However, the board did not change the speaker. Source: The Daily Progress. Moreover, on the day before the ceremony, the VCU Board of Visitors voted not to mandate a racial literacy course requirement that students and faculty had advocated for. This was one of the issues protesting students cited. Sources: Richmond Times-Dispatch, The Daily Progress. The university placed flyers on all seats as attendees arrived, stating, "Please celebrate our graduates with behavior that allows everyone to enjoy this milestone occasion. Individuals who disrupt the ceremony are subject to removal." This could be seen as an indirect warning against protests. Source: The Daily Progress. Despite the student opposition, VCU President Michael Rao conferred an honorary doctorate degree on Youngkin during the ceremony. He called it a recognition of Youngkin's great achievements. This suggests the administration did not change course based on the student protests. Source: The Daily Progress. A VCU spokesperson stated that students who walked out would not face disciplinary action from the university as long as they were not disruptive. Source: VPM News. In summary, while the VCU administration was aware of student opposition to Youngkin as the commencement speaker, the available information suggests they did not directly address the protesters' concerns or alter their plans for the ceremony. The administration appeared to stay the course in honoring Youngkin despite the walkout, while discouraging disruptive protests. However, no evidence is provided of VCU leadership engaging in dialogue with the concerned students or publicly acknowledging their complaints about Youngkin's stances on various issues. Consequently, the protesting students' actions drew attention to their causes. They sent a clear message to the governor and university administration about the importance of promoting racial equity and inclusion in education. Sources: The Washington Post, The 19th News. The demonstration was a powerful statement by these graduates in support of diversity, equity, and inclusion, said VCU Professor Chioka Anson. Indeed, it reflects the values and principles they learned in our African American Studies program. Source: VCU Department of African American Studies. The VCU graduates' commencement protest added to the ongoing pushback against Youngkin's agenda. Students, educators, and activists say it undermines efforts to create more inclusive and equitable schools in Virginia. As one student signed proclaimed at the walkout, "Diversity is our strength." Source: WRIC-TV. Support African Elements at patreon.com/African Elements and hear recent news in a single playlist. Additionally, you can gain early access to ad-free video content. About the author. Darius Spearman has been a professor of Black Studies at San Diego City College, where he has been an educator since 2007. He is the author of several books, including Between the Color Lines, A History of African Americans on the California Frontier through 1890. You can visit Darius online at africanelements.org.